Alrighty, we've got an interesting video today. We're going to be talking about everything spawn related when it comes to squad. There's been a little controversy amongst the community when it comes to the proximity scaling for habs, and this sparked an idea in my head to provide my own thoughts on the current situation, as well as being an informative video. I've played squad since the very first playable build back in pre-alpha, and with that I have experienced every change and iteration of the spawn systems within squad. So, to start things off, we're going to go over a timeline of the FOB Overrun mechanics. To start things off, we're going to be going over from where it currently is and move our way backwards to when it first began. The current implementation requires 2 enemies at 20 meters to disable the spawn, and this scales out to 80 meters. Every 10 meters within this 80 meters from the 20 meter zone requires an additional enemy to disable the spawn. This current implementation is not intended, and it wasn't even supposed to be released with v2. It somehow slipped into the v2 release build in a misconfigured state. The intentional implementation was supposed to start off at scaling from 30 meters to 80 meters instead of 20. The difference between the two is quite minor, the most inner radius difference being 10 meters and an extra enemy to disable. They should play out fairly similar. Going back to Alpha 12, we just had a single 30 meter radius around the hab, and 2 enemy within this 30 meter radius would disable the spawn. This implementation of the overrun mechanic was quite easy to achieve. Getting 2 friendlies within 30 meters of the enemy hab was extremely doable. Though I will say, the current implementation of the new overrun mechanic makes it quite easy as well. Moving to Alpha 9, we still had a 30 meter radius, but instead of being around the hab, it was located around the FOB radio. Instead of disabling the enemy spawn, it would add a 10-second timer to the spawn for every enemy within the 30 meters. It gave incentive to attack, but also gave the defenders a chance to fight back. One of the main reasons Offworld moved away from this style of overrun is because it was difficult for both new players and experienced players to understand when the spawn timer was constantly jumping up and down, which is fair enough, but I see this mainly as an issue of not properly documenting how the game mechanics worked. But to be neutral, I will say it was an alpha build and things were constantly changing, so it didn't make sense to document things at the time properly. Taking quite a big leap back to Alpha 2, there was a 75 meter radius around the FOB, and instead of a 10-second spawn increase per enemy, it was 15 seconds. Take note, back then, there were only 72 player servers and there were no vehicles whatsoever, as vehicles were implemented in version 7. With a lot less players and it being a bit more difficult to get within range of an enemy FOB, it makes sense that the radius was this large at the time. A quick fun fact, there were no habs to spawn on, as those were implemented in Alpha 9. So when you spawned on a FOB, you spawned on the radio itself. Going back to pre-alpha, the overrun zone was 150 meters, and 2 enemy within this 150 meters would disable the spawn. Now I know some of you are thinking, holy shit, 150 meters. Well yes, it is quite large. There's a reason it was that big. FOB footprints back then were fairly small. You didn't have weapon emplacements as those were added in V7. There was no hab. All you had was your radio, a weapon crate, and some defensive deployables. It was a lot more difficult to locate an enemy FOB. You'd just see enemies stroll on by without seeing a single thing. What gave away the FOB's location back then was a random ammo crate just in some random field or next to some random building. That would indicate that there was a radio pretty close by. Moving on from the timeline, we're going to be focusing on the issues linked to the overrun mechanic. Instead of using the focus on the current implementation, we're going to be referencing the intended implementation. The differences between the two are minor enough that their overall impact on the gameplay would be quite similar. Before we continue, I'll say I understand why the proximity scaling is a thing, and it sounds good on paper, and it can work to a degree depending on its implementation, but with how it is implemented or planned to be implemented won't mesh well with multiple aspects of the game. The first thing I want to focus on is the disable range of the proximity scaling itself. The overall radius range does not scale well with a lot of the maps and how they're set up. The reference point we're going to be using is the capture point The Nest on Kokan, which is located southwest of Grandale. Let's say the current defense point for your team is Grandale, so you have set up a FOB southwest on The Nest. Your hab is placed centrally. From this point of view, it doesn't look too bad. Now let's add the disable radius. As you can see, it extends well out past the buildings and into the fields. This makes it pretty easy for the enemy just to move in range with 7 or 8 players and completely disable your spawn. To add another visual reference, let's add in some enemy and friendlies. We're going to use blueberries as a reference because you know blueberries are always to blame. So there is 8 enemy and they have positioned themselves all within 80 meters. The enemy just plan to sit tight and slowly move forward. They have no pressure because they can just sit tight and block your spawn for as long as they need, as long as they don't lose anyone. The defenders now have the pressure on them as they have to push out and actively kill the enemy to make sure that they're able to open their spawn up again. Now for argument's sake, let's say the blueberries end up doing a 2-for-2 trade. 2 enemies die and 2 friendlies die. The enemy react to this based on their numbers and end up moving in closer. They move in close enough that 6 people within 60 meters disables the spawn again. Though during the time it took for this to happen, 2 more blueberries were able to spawn in the hab before it was disabled again. Now we're back at stage 1 where it was previously, though we have more even numbers and the fighting's a bit closer. But we forgot one thing. The enemy have active rally points. Let's say the enemy force was 2 fragmented squads. Now you have 2 squads to deal with and their respawns constantly attacking your hab. The friendly rally point that was there has been wiped, so there's no chance of respawns. The only hope is the few friendlies at Grandel and they have to push their way back. Now this is pretty much a losing battle number wise. You don't have the respawns, the enemy do. The only way this situation is going to get better is if a few of the blueberries are excellent shooters and are able to push and wipe the rally points. If one of the blueberries are an SL, they're going to have to try break free and set a rally point so they have their own respawns. The likeliness of this occurring though is pretty low as we're talking about Pubby Squad here. What typically occurs is the friendlies end up fishbowled and surrounded and killed. The friendlies might end up getting a few trade kills, but that is not enough. You're going to lose your only spawn in the area and your only hope is to reset as fast as possible. Now this is an issue on every single map in the game. There isn't enough locations on maps to match the scale of the disable radius, so it doesn't matter if you put it near or further away from an objective, it's still going to happen. This issue is amplified on urban maps. Quickly, we head to Fallujah. You should be able to see the problem here. With an urban setting, there are so many buildings that the radius will cover a lot of them. This means it's a lot easier to get fishbowled, and it's also a lot easier for the enemy just to sit tight within the radius and force you to come out. On more open maps, the process is a bit slower, but on maps like Fallujah, Mutaha, Samari, even Nava, the process speeds up quite significantly. It creates this weird situation where the defenders become the attackers and the attackers become the defenders. The difference is, the original defenders are defending a main spawn point, while the attackers turned defenders are defending an invisible circle blocking an enemy spawn. This is a really odd balance and gives too much initiative to the original attackers. To put things further into perspective, we're going to go back to Alpha 12 and look at the overrun mechanics there. As previously stated, the overrun radius was 30 meters and only required 2 enemy within it to disable the hab spawn. And if you remember, I stated with this overrun mechanic it was quite easy to achieve. What if I told you the current implementation is a lot easier than this? Let me explain why. All the enemy had to do was get 2 people within the radius and just sit on a wall. Now that seems pretty easy, right, to disable a team-wide spawn like that. And if these 2 enemy were extremely good shooters, they could take the hab. If they were just the average player, all they had to do was hold tight and wait for the friendlies to turn up. Then you have the fishbowl situation unfold. But it was almost just as easy for the defenders to open their spawn up again. So let's go back to just 2 enemy and the disable radius. Now due to the size of the disable radius, it was quite easy for the defenders to react, and all they had to do was kill 1 enemy to reopen the spawn. Now let's look at the counter argument. What happens if there was more than 2 enemy within inside the radius? So we had 2 more enemy on the eastern side of the radius. This spices things up a bit. Now it requires 3 enemy to be killed to open up the spawn again. And we're not even talking about kill trades and respawns coming from rally points. Now this situation is very similar to the current implementation, just on a smaller scale and with a singular disable radius, but it's a lot easier for the defenders to defend. And here's why. Because the radius is smaller. There's a lot more room for error for the attackers, they have to get a lot closer to the hab, and it's a lot easier for the defenders to set up a spread and catch enemy coming into the radius. The too long don't read. It is much easier to defend a single 30 meter disable range that's requirement is only 2 enemy to block, than an 80 meter disable range that requirement scales depending on how much meters it is. The attackers have a lot more leeway and a lot more room to play with compared to the old system. Now don't misinterpret this as me going, add the old fucking system back. No, I'm not suggesting that at all. I actually disliked the Alpha 12 system, mainly because it was quite easy to achieve it for just 2 people to disable a spawn so easy. I don't hate the new system, I think it needs tweaking. I like the premise of it, but I don't like its current implementation. The older Alpha 12 system was a bit more balanced compared to the new system when it came to attacking and defending. The current system, like I've said previously, is stacked more towards the attacking side. Now there's a reason we've gone through the timeline and these explanations. When the Alpha 12 Overrun system came in, I disliked it like I said, but I came up with an idea that I thought would work well. A combination of the old systems and the new system, and I still think it's valid to this day. I hope the timeline and my explanations help you guys to see where I'm coming from. So let's have a look at my ideas. Like shown in the quote, it's basically a hybrid of all the previous systems in one. From 80 meters to 30 meters, spawn time is increased per enemy. The time of the spawn increase depends on how close you are to the hab. The disable range is 20 meters and requires 3 enemy within it to disable the spawn. 1 or 2 enemy within 20 meters will increase the spawn by 30 seconds each, capping total at 60-second increase. I think this is fairly balanced in terms of both attacking and defending. It gives incentive for the attackers to want to push in closer and not just camp, but it also gives a reason for the defenders to either want to sit tight because they can get respawns or push out to lower their spawn times. None of this weird one-way street balance of defenders becoming the attackers and attackers becoming the defenders. Completely avoids that situation. Now there's a lot of variables, and that can be confusing and quite complex, so you can simplify it a bit. Here's a simplified version of the hybrid system. Instead of 7 different zones, there is 3, but it still retains the same idea and the incentives of the previous version. But then there's the issue that a lot of people are brought up, including myself in this video, of the 80 meter range. While the system does mitigate it, as the main problem of the current system is every zone being a disable zone. But let's head to a third option, the small version of the hybrid system. Again, still retains the same idea and incentives of the other two, and I think it scales quite nicely. I think it's a sweet spot in size. And we'll quickly head to Fallujah so you can see what it's like on an urban dense map. Alright, let's move on to the next topic, FOB exclusion range. Now I don't want to stick too much on this topic as I'm pretty sure it's going to get patched in the future, but I still want to express some concerns and explain some things. To start this off, let's bring up the Samari map. Now let's plop up the FOB exclusion range. Yeah, so you can kind of see the problem here. So yellow is the old exclusion range and red is the new. Now let's go through a little scenario here. We're going to be using the 300 meter radius instead of 400 meter. You are the British team and someone sets up a mortar fob to the northwest. The Mia and the Yeetmobiles are going to meet the British at slums. Your team knows this and discusses whether they're going to put a fob either to the west or to the northwest. Your team decides to go for the safer option to the west. Now you can see the problem here straight away. Now this would not be possible if the 400 meter exclusion zone was a part of this equation. This is how it would play out in the current version of Squad. 400 meters is too limiting and very punishing. One bad fob placement means no more fobs on the whole map. You lose that fob and you're getting steamrolled back to main very quickly. All that needs to happen is the exclusion zone needs to scale depending on map size, because even on some medium sized maps like Logar and Kora, it can still be a problem. It's mainly due to the fact that there's not a lot of viable fob locations, unless you like to stick fobs on some random hill or fucking in the middle of Narnia. So this is going to bring up the next discussion point, FOB spam. So the reason that the FOB exclusion zone was raised to 400 meters, and one of the reasons to why proximity scaling was added, was to influence smarter FOB placement and also to counter FOB spam. Most people probably aren't aware, but FOB spam has been a part of Squad since its beginning, just in varying forms and intensities. So I'm going to pull up an example from Alpha 8 and one from current day. It even dates back further than Alpha 8, before vehicles were added in V7, so from pre-Alpha to V7, there were no vehicles whatsoever. SLs would walk around pooping out fobs, which would build supply points and then activate a spawn at a certain threshold. Now we're going to talk about why FOB spam is a thing and why it's so prominent. So we're going to quickly bring up a map of Yeeho. As you can see, there's FOB spam all around the cap. FOB spam is a part of the experienced player's tool belt to get blueberries where they need to be. It allows multiple directions of attack and a constant flow of bodies on cap. It's also a way to guarantee that the blueberries stay in place and have multiple directions of attack even if they lose a few fobs. Another reason FOB spam is so prominent is because, as mentioned earlier in this video, how vulnerable fobs currently are. If you decide to place 1 or 2 fobs and you end up losing them, then in typical blueberry and new player fashion, they spawn at that one random Narnia fob. FOB spam is only effective against inexperienced players and a team with inexperienced SLs. If you're facing good players and good SLs, you'll find yourself from this to this. The counter to FOB spam is experience. Good SLs and experienced players will utilize their commanders, will utilize mortars, vehicles, and attacking the most vulnerable points to remove the FOBs off the map and take tickets off the enemy. FOBs aren't overly hard to find, not when you have drones, or just pay attention and notice the huge blob moving from hab to hab. Now this is not me saying FOB spam is awesome and should stay in the game. It is shitty and it promotes zerg blobbing, which is against the spirit of the game. There's really not a lot the devs can do to prevent FOB spam from happening. The devs could raise the ticket cost for FOB radios again. Another approach could be setting a hard limit on how many FOB radios could be placed. This is one I'm typically against, but it is an option. Another option would be to make radios cost construction points to place. Or Off-Wheel could continue to tweak exclusion zones, which is also not an option I favour. I think a combination of increasing the FOB radio's ticket cost as well as making it cost construction points to place could be an interesting approach to dealing with this FOB spam. It would mainly help prevent it in the early to mid game. Late game would still probably end a little FOB spammy. Now we're going to move on to the final aspect of spawning I want to talk about, rally points. All it takes currently is one single enemy to walk within 30 meters of your rally point and it will destroy it. Now I don't like this, simply because you don't have to know where a rally point is to wipe it. One way experienced players wipe the enemy rally points is by hopping in a vehicle and driving around the outskirts of a capture point. Then there's the most annoying one, 69-420 Blaze It, the marksman, randomly comes out of nowhere and wipes your rally point. He had no clue it was there and was still rewarded. I think if one enemy is within 30 meters of your rally point, it should disable the spawn. To destroy a rally point, it has to be destroyed with explosives or shoveled down. Similar to that of Postscriptum, since a rally point is limited to one use and costs 50 ammo points to rearm, I think it could potentially balance out. Anyway, this is pretty much the conclusion of this video now. I've covered everything I want to cover. If you guys have any thoughts or discussion points, put them in the comments down below. And until the next video, I'll catch you guys later.